Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to be thinking about why certain people get so annoyed about new usages, borrowings, shifts in meaning, and words they don't recognize. There's a wide subsection of people who believe that the English language is decaying. Today let's check out their argument and see whether they're right. Farewell, my beloved language, once English, now a vile orangutangage. Not my words, but the words of writer Ogden Nash, writing in his 1960 New Yorker piece called Laments for a Dying Language. He's particularly annoyed about the spread of the word mystique. And about that word, he writes, someone comes up with a linguistic gimmick and thousands flock to mimic. Now, even though this was written 60 years ago, perhaps you can see where he's coming from. The language seems to shift all around us, and it's not that easy to keep on top of the remarkable pace of these changes. Sometimes it's easy to feel left behind or like you don't understand a new usage or a new word, and that can lead to feelings of frustration. If I pick up a copy of the Daily Mail, I'll almost certainly be greeted with an article that looks something like this. Readers are frequently encouraged to write in with their linguistic pet peeves. Now, these could be Americanisms. Is it garbage day? Or they might be office jargon. Or sometimes they're just puzzling aesthetic judgments about words that you've almost certainly never even thought about. Take this example where the writer considers the American English word sidewalk and compares it unfavourably to the British English equivalent pavement. He writes, "Pavement is a wonderful word, a fragment of old French that resonates with ringing blows of medieval craftsmen as they laid a stone floor. Pavere is the Latin word for beating or ramming down. Why must we in Britain discard a beautiful, meaningful word and replace it with a Frankenstein creation?" But before we start planning any kind of funeral service for English, we should probably realise that change has been one of the constant features of language as far back as we can trace it. Have a look at these three versions of the Lord's Prayer, for example. As you can see, from Middle English to early modern English to today, they look completely different. And the reality is that Shakespeare, writing in 1600, wouldn't have been able to understand the language of Chaucer 300 years earlier. Or consider that in the early 2000s, you'd use your dial-up modem to surf the World Wide Web. You could go on GeoCities and chat rooms, and once there, the first question you'd inevitably ask people would be ASL. Or at least I did that because I was kind of cool back then. In fact, in articles like these, 10 things that people once thought were ruining the English language, you can see that in the 15th century, people were genuinely worried that the advent of writing would have a negative impact on people's memories. About 100 years later, there was a great deal of worry that Latinate loanwords in scholarly fields, such as medicine and science, words like chaos, pendulum, skeleton, maximum, would render the English language indecipherable to the common person on the street. Indeed, the first ever dictionary in the English language, published in 1604 and called A Table Alphabetical, contains in its preface an explanation that people can no longer understand each other because of an influx of new words. The writer suggesting that the language has changed so much in his lifetime that people can no longer understand their own mother tongue. So really what we have here is two concurrent timelines. English language changes, and then there are moral panics about those changes. Every single major technological, social, or cultural development has its own changes and has its own people who strongly feel that these changes are symptomatic of wider decline or wider decay. And these judgments are usually on the grounds that new usages, new words are lazy, inelegant, unintelligent, stupid, improper, displeasing either to the ear or to the eye. But notice all of these criticisms are aesthetic judgments, personal prejudices which have very little, if anything, to do with language itself. Most linguists are dispassionate observers of language change. Linguists tend to describe changes as they see it rather than prescribe how language ought to be. An example might be what's called the habitual be. Now, this form of the verb to be has long been a feature of certain African American vernacular English, but if you go online you can see that this type of usage has made its way into more standard English, as in this coffee be hot, for example. In my own view, changes like these are best conceptualized neither as progress nor decay, but rather an inevitable feature of language. Changes happen in the past and they'll continue to happen in the future. It's as inevitable as the tides. In fact, this analogy to a tide is the way that David Crystal writes about language change in his tide metaphor. He writes, "No two high tides are the same. It does not make sense to say that yesterday's tide is in some way better or worse than tomorrow's. The tides are different, reaching one part of the beach today, a different part tomorrow." And you know what? I think David Crystal has nailed this one. Let's consider something like text speak, which will be familiar to you if you ever owned a phone that looks like this. When this type of mobile device came into fashion, texting looked quite different. For example, in order to get the letter S, you'd have had to press the number 7 key 4 times. Text messages were quite expensive, costing 10 or 12p for your 160 characters. So there was a real premium on space, and this necessitated an abbreviated kind of language, which will be familiar to you if you've ever written "see you later." Teenagers of today would probably not even recognize many of the abbreviations which were caused by the advent of these early mobile phones. And the fact that these changes have come and gone suggests that all of the moral panic which was around at the time, and seriously, there really was a moral panic about texting. The idea that texting was ruining the language was just something that was inescapable in the early 2000s. But I think in this example, the tide metaphor is really apt. Those changes came in, and then the tide took them out again. Think about words that even 10 years ago were culturally ubiquitous, like iPod or DVD. If we consider those words now, I think they're being taken out by the tide. And you can kind of prove this by going onto Google, typing in a word plus definition, and then you can physically see a graph of words usages over time. So long, DVDs. It was nice knowing you. However, this doesn't stop people from getting super annoyed. A flashpoint recently came when the Oxford English Dictionary decided to update the entry for the word literally. They added a definition to mean metaphorically, as in, I'm literally starving. Many people wrote into the Oxford English Dictionary to complain, but the Oxford English Dictionary, being a descriptivist organisation, said that usage defines meaning, and they were happy to put in this new definition, seeing as, well, that's what people are actually saying. And these kinds of shifts happen all around us. My friend recently pointed out that the verb drop seems to have undergone a kind of semantic broadening. I remember listening to early rap records where it was common to hear the phrase drop the beat, and this referred to a needle drop, that is something physically dropping onto the vinyl in order for the music to commence or start, I guess. And we have this wider meaning of drop to mean release or commence. And it's not just in the context of music. So for example, an influencer might be asked to drop their skincare routine. Harry and Meghan were asked to drop their baby name. Here's a tweet from PlayStation 5 in which the verb drop is used 3 times in the space of one tweet. However, all of this doesn't stop prescriptivist societies like the Apostrophe Society, who got super annoyed when Waterstones dropped the apostrophe from their brand name, by the way, or the Campaign for Queen's English, or John Humphreys in his book Lost for Words, or the Daily Mail, or the guy from this meme, from getting angry and agitated at the changes which they seem powerless to stop. But you know what? I would compare these prescriptivists to King Canute taking a chair onto the beach and commanding the tides to stop. Guys, I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. I can see where they're coming from because the English language is something that we naturally feel belongs to all of us. And studies show that we lose receptiveness to new linguistic innovations the older we are. The net effect of this is that our idealized version of the language probably fossilizes when we're around about our early 20s or even in our late teens. So we consider that version of the language to be proper or better or just something that we feel more comfortable with, and changes that are subsequent to that might strike us as being unusual, unfamiliar, or undesirable. That's fine, but really this logic is no different to my dad, who thinks that the last decent album was released in 1973 when Emerson, Lake and Palmer decided to disband. So next time you hear someone get annoyed about literally or cronut or could I be any more excited? Just remember that people were literally angry at William Shakespeare in the 17th century for making up new words. And if the English language has survived this far, then we've probably got a few more years left in us yet. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, click like and subscribe and you can be alerted next time a new one pops up. See you soon.